Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the Big Blue View Radio network. All right, with your 4-8 Giants on the bye week, here to help me make sense of all things going on with your New York Giants is Dan Duggan of The Athletic. Dan, thank you very, very much for hopping on.
Yeah, happy to be here, Ed.
Hey, I had your cohort Charlotte Carroll on a couple of weeks ago, so I have to be an equal opportunity podcast interviewer. So it's your turn.
All right, tough act to follow.
Yeah, we had fun talking to Charlotte. So we always like to get guests on. It's always good for folks to hear from somebody other than me. I think they hear enough from me. Hey, before we get deep into anything, I just wanted to say that I really appreciated the post you did on Saquon the other day. The sort of behind the scenes look. I love stuff like that. Stuff that's away from the game. Stuff that it tells us a little bit more about people than what we see on the football field.
Oh, yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, so anyone who's maybe listening who doesn't know, yeah, I kind of tagged along with Saquon after the game on Sunday, and he does this thing where he meets with 3 kids from 2 different organizations. One is with young adults who are facing homelessness, and one is for children who have a parent or parents incarcerated. So it's a really cool thing he does. I mean, he is certainly someone who kind of talks the talk, but also walks the walk when it comes to giving back to the community. Because I think a lot of guys do stuff for the cameras, but he had been doing this, since his rookie year without any media attention. I just kind of approached him about doing it, and he certainly was receptive. And I appreciate you saying that because, yeah, I think it was cool, something different, and I think it shows a side of him that everyone sees the guys on the field or in a press conference, whatever. But to see him in that setting with these young people, to me, was really a cool side of him.
Yeah, it's great to see guys make use of their platform to help the community, to help kids who aren't as fortunate. So I appreciate it, and I hope other people did too.
Thank you.
Hey, so let's get into some of what's going on with the Giants at this point. We had a chance on Monday to speak with General Manager Joe Schoen. It's the only time we've spoken with him since the season started. It's late in the year. You love to get a chance to speak to the GM earlier in the year, but I thought some of what he had to say was interesting, and some of how he said it was interesting, which is always the cool thing about being there to see it in person. Just wanted to get your reaction to some of it, and I'll start with what he said about Daniel Jones. So I'm just curious, your reaction to all of that.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, like you said, he hasn't spoken in a while, so he obviously knew this was on the calendar. I'm glad he did it because he did the bye week last year, and so I hope it just becomes an annual thing. You don't want guys to kind of hide when things aren't going well and be out front when things are. So it's good that he kept that precedent going. But so he obviously knows that the Daniel Jones topic was going to, kind of dominate that presser. I mean, he didn't even let us ask the first question. He came out and, kind of hit some of the big points right off the bat. And obviously that was one of them. And he said, the expectation is that Daniel will be our quarterback when he's healthy. And then he said, but, obviously we don't know how long the recovery is going to be. So we're going to have to address that position. Like, it's all obvious stuff. But I think he was very astute with how he worded things. He didn't paint himself into a corner really either way. Like, no one can call him a liar if they draft a quarterback with, let's say, the 3rd pick in the draft come April, because he said, hey, you got to ask point blank, does that mean you take a quarterback in the 1st round? And he said, we'll take the best player available. So he kind of left a nice open-ended question that GMs like to do. Because, again, they're not going to tell us the truth or be totally transparent and everything, but they also don't want to just blatantly lie, because then you kind of lose just credibility in these settings. So I think it's almost like a lawyer. You word things a certain way that, you give yourself some wiggle room. I thought he did a good job of straddling that line because, again, he was very well prepared, knew what the types of questions would be, knew how he wanted to answer them. So he kind of stuck to that script. And, again, I think he left it open to interpretation. If you think, hey, Daniel Jones is still the guy and, get him healthy and upgrade the supporting cast, you can still believe that after listening to Joe Schoen. If you think, listen, it's time to move on, probably going to have a top draft pick here, he let you believe that. So I think that's kind of what he wanted to do. He's not going to come out and openly declare what's going to happen in 5 months, especially because he doesn't know. There's so many variables and so many things that have to happen before any decision has to be made.
Right. He certainly couldn't throw Jones under the bus and say it's time to move on, because no matter what the situation is next year, Daniel Jones is on the roster. And at some point, whether it's week 1 or week 8, at some point, Daniel Jones is going to play football for the Giants next year at some point. So, yeah, so I did think it was interesting. It's going to be fascinating to see what the Giants do. I mean, and simply when it comes to the Jones piece, they could do just about anything. They could draft a guy early, in the first round. They could try to have their cake and eat it too, and try to get a guy in the second round or trade back into the first round. So it's fascinating. I'm just not one of those people who says if they want a quarterback, it has to be Caleb Williams or Drake May. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, well, listen, they've kind of played themselves sort of out of that sweepstakes because, these last 2 wins, I think there was a point there we thought like 2-15 was very much on the table. Now it's flipped, and now they got 4 wins, and I think people are starting to say, oh, maybe if they scratch a few more wins, the playoffs aren't out of the picture, which is, it's crazy. It tells you how the NFL is and how brilliant they were to expand the playoff field because it just keeps everybody alive as long as possible. But playoffs aside, just being at 4 wins, you look at the teams behind them, I don't see them getting past in the standings. I don't think the Panthers are suddenly going to run off a couple of wins. That Patriots team we saw last Sunday, I don't see them, scratching out a couple more wins. So those teams are probably going to be locked in to the top 2 picks. I mean, obviously, I guess the Panthers pick belongs to the Bears, but I still don't know if you've seen enough from Justin Fields for them to commit. But bottom line, I guess what I'm long-winded way, I don't think they're going to have a chance to get Williams in May unless they're going to make some, major trade up. So I think that's just sort of where it's like, so now if you're picking, let's just say 5th, you're picking 7th. It's a little more cloudy there because who is Jaden Daniels worth that? Would they really make a huge offer to try to go up to get one of those top 2 guys? It's just a lot less clarity. Whereas when they were cruising along and it looked like 2-15 was in play, they were going to be confronted with like, you're either taking one of these guys who everyone agrees is, worthy of that and a top 2 caliber pick. And now it's just so much murkier because, we don't know where they're going to end up, but certainly probably not in striking distance of those 2 guys.
Just while we're on the topic, what's your take on the whole idea of tanking? I know that there's a lot of Giants fans out there that would have rather seen 2-15 that are unhappy that they've won games. And for me, that's a hard pill to swallow because for me, these guys, we see them in the locker room, Dan. We know what they go through in a lot of ways. We see how they react to winning and losing in some respects. And for me, I always like to see guys win. I always think there's value in it. But, what's your take on the whole idea of tanking for a higher pick?
Yeah, I mean, so from a fan perspective, I totally understand it because you're saying like, whatever, let's just, let's pretend like it's Madden, simulate these last 6-7 games, whatever it was when they had the 2 wins and get that top 2 pick. And we'll get to April and we'll draft Caleb Williams, we'll draft Drake May. But the people involved can't think that way, don't think that way. They have no incentive to really think that way. Like maybe Joe Schoen and Brian Davis, you could say they might look down the road and say, oh man, to get one of those guys would really set us up. But they still have to just get there. And these guys, like obviously the coaches are working 7 days a week, round the clock. They're getting ready to win every game. Like there's no way like Brian Davis doesn't like cut out of the office at noontime on a Friday because who cares if we win this game? Like they're pouring everything into winning these games. That's just how they're wired. And it has to be because listen, Brian Daboll, I think, is safe for year 3, but 2-15 versus let's say 6-11, it has a different look. And if you can say, hey, we won 4 games down the stretch, even playing Tommy DeVito and maybe Tyrod, that means something. Especially to the Giants owners, they're never going to be the type to green light like, hey, you know what? Let's kind of pack it in here. That's just certainly not the way John Mara will ever treat these games. He's, I think the strongest thing I've ever heard him say was during that 2017 season when tanking came up, and he said it's complete bullshit. I don't know if you've
that's fine.
But okay. But so for John Mara to say that, I mean, I've never heard that guy curse. So, I mean, that tells you how strongly they feel about it. And then with players, I mean, zero motivation to tank. I mean, they're for a couple of reasons. They're all playing for their next contract. I think Justin Pugh has said that well a few times. Like you're putting out this film, whether it's for the Giants or the 31 other teams. I mean, it just doesn't even make sense. You don't have to go too deep. And the players, like they're out there to play. They're out there to win. They don't really care who the Giants could pick in the draft next year. Half these guys definitely won't be here. And I mean, what are you going to try and help the draft stock for the team that you might not even be with next year? That just wouldn't even enter their mind. So I think the only way you could see it is sort of how the roster is managed. And you could say, like, if DeVito was terrible and Tyrod came back, Tyrod was healthy and they stuck with DeVito, you kind of say, like, what's the motivation there? But I don't even think that's in play because DeVito has at least been competent. So I think that'll be a topic, for sure next week. Who's going to start, assuming Tyrod's cleared? But it's not if they're sticking with DeVito, they're obviously tanking. You could make a case that might be the way they go, and it wouldn't be a ridiculous thing. But that's the only way a team could tank in the NFL. I think it's just making a decision where you're not necessarily playing the best player. Like if you start sitting down, you sit Andrew Thomas down to, give Josh Miles reps at left tackle. Like that's the type of stuff that would be like, well, that's a little eyebrow raising. But once the ball is snapped on Sunday, everybody out there is trying to win. And you saw that, they were jubilant after that kick went wide left on Sunday. They don't care. They're not thinking about the draft pick. That's so far away for these guys.
No, they put too much into it. They want to win these games, and they put their bodies and their careers on the line. So I always feel good for these guys when things work out well for them. I wanted to ask you next about some of the things that Joe said about the offensive line, and in particular what he said about Evan Neal. For folks that didn't see it or hear it, Joe said about Evan Neal, he said that he still thinks that Evan Neal can play, and he still thinks that Evan Neal can be a tackle in the NFL. And I don't know if that's just sort of, let's wait until the off season to talk about that, or if that's how he really feels. I just hope, and I don't remember, when did you start covering the team, Dan? What year did you start covering?
2016. Me and McAdoo came in together.
Right. So I don't know about you, but it gave off for me when he was talking about Neal and talking about going back and watching the film and saying this kid can play. If you remember, Jerry Reese was, I think, the only person on the planet after Eric Flowers' rookie year who thought that Eric Flowers could play left tackle in the NFL. And Eric Flowers played there for 3 years only because Jerry Reese insisted that he not get moved, because Jerry insisted, I drafted this guy to play left tackle, and I want to be proven right. And I don't know about you, but I sure hope that what Joe Schoen is saying is, or isn't saying, is I want to be right about this guy.
Yeah, no, I think the Evan Neal stuff was probably the most interesting and maybe candid Schoen was, because again, he knows what questions are coming. He knows he's going to be asked about Evan Neal most likely. It's top 10 pick from a year ago who has not performed well. And his first comment was, Evan needs to play better.
Right.
This regime has not really done that type of thing of calling out any player. And it wasn't like the harshest comment, but it was harsh for this regime because, again, Dable will never say anything negative about a player. So I thought that was interesting that he opened there. But then he also went on to say, like, I still have faith in him. He's a hard worker, this and that. So it's kind of interesting that you kind of put it on him, though, initially. And even went on to say how he went back and watched his tape at Alabama, which to me felt like, was he just confirming his own work? Like, no, what I thought was there was there. I thought that was interesting. And then it's like, so then the question is, are you kind of maybe pinning the blame on Bobby Johnson? Because you're saying, well, hey, when I look back at that Alabama film, he still looked pretty good. So I don't know what's wrong. But again, his initial comment was putting it on Neal. I found that interesting. As far as the tackle guard stuff, I think at this point, it does him no good to say, yeah, that's on the table, because, they still do have 5 games left. I think Neal will be back, if not the first game after the bye. I think he's going to return at some point here, and he's going to return at right tackle. So why even put that out there? So that's one of those situations, like in my first answer, where like they're not going to paint themselves into a corner, and there's no need to share every plan they may have. But I think the other point Schoen made that I've made a lot is it's just a killer to miss this time if you're Evan Neal. Like every snaps, every game he misses is really valuable evaluation time that they're missing out on. So, well, I think,
No, I was going to say the other part of that is it's 2 ankle injuries for him this year. I think 5 missed games so far. And he also missed a significant chunk of training camp. I mean, the Giants, I think we all knew that really improvement on the offensive line was going to come down to whether Evan Neal improved this year for the Giants. And it's been difficult for him, I think, and you don't want to make an excuse, but he hasn't been able to put together, the kind of long stretches of getting snaps every day and getting in games that would really help him.
Yeah, but then the problem becomes, so now you have to plan for next year, and if we're 2 years into his career and there's still no really hard, sustained evidence that he can be a quality NFL tackle, you can't go into year 3 saying, okay, Evan Neal's our right tackle, set it and forget it, we're good there. You just can't do that, in my opinion. So that's where the shifting to guard comes into the equation, or maybe, at the very least, they should bring Tyree Phillips back, because I think we saw those mistakes to let him go in the first place. But do you maybe sign a mid-level veteran right tackle to have sort of a more solidified backup plan in case Neal just doesn't develop? So I think how they manage him will be fascinating. So I think first step is let's get him back on the field. Let's get 5 games to see if some of the improvements that, I think maybe Dave or Bobby Johnson, someone said they felt like he was improving in that Raiders game, did okay against Max Crosby and then gets hurt. But let's see if some of those improvements can show up. Because listen, if he finishes with 5 really good games, then maybe that's where the Andrew Thomas light bulb coming on late in year 2 parallel could be applicable. But again, we just haven't seen that. So I don't think, I think they went in obviously after 1 year and said, listen, he's young, we love him, he works hard, he's going to make the league. So whatever the reason is, whether it's injury, coaching, whatever, he obviously hasn't made that leap yet. So you can't go into year 3 like hope isn't a plan. Like you need to know if he's the guy, and if you're not sure, then that's kind of your answer. And that's when the guard stuff I think becomes more of a topic that they'll address in the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. You just can't throw him out there again if you're not sure. So let me ask you about the other sort of topic of the week with the Giants, and that's the Brian Daboll and Wink Martindale stuff. All of the tension between those two guys, and Jay Glazer's report that Wink might not last the season before they part ways, and I think that went out the window Sunday with the way that the Giants played defensively. I think you can't, even if you want to, I think you can't really justify pushing Wink out the door right now without basically losing the defensive players in your locker room at this point, which is something that Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen obviously don't want to do. But just what's your take, on what you think is going on between those two guys?
Yeah, with that report coming out on Sunday, if say the Giants went out and lost, gave up 30 points to the Patriots in the loss, the bye week might have been a natural time for that mutual parting, whatever you want to call it, to take place. But like you said, 3 takeaways, 7 points in a win. It'd be really tough to sell moving on. So listen, there's 5 games left, whatever difference they are, as long as it doesn't turn into Mark Colombo, Joe Judge, you grown-ups can probably get to the finish line of the season and then reassess. But listen, a couple things. Jay Glazer's batting average is better than anybody in the business. Like, I know Giants fans don't want to believe it, or the Giants have shot it down. Find me the time where Jay Glazer's just been totally off base on a report. Like, he doesn't just throw stuff against the wall. Like, if he's putting it out there, you can kind of take it to the bank. And then obviously my own reporter, just being around the team, I don't have any reason to doubt it. Like, I definitely have seen some cracks in the foundation. Now, the difference between maybe me and Jay Glazer, he's a little more sourced up, and he can, drop the hammer when he reports it and say, listen, it's really, I think he said it's a bad place, and that, again, it might not even get to the finish line of this season, or he doesn't see it continuing beyond the season at the very least. I couldn't go that far, but I have definitely seen and heard that there's friction there. So the report didn't surprise me. It surprised me that it, escalated to the point where Jay laid out where, again, like, they might not have even made it through the season. So to your point, yes, I think they have to catch their breath here. It wouldn't be a good look for either side to have it end, randomly here in week 13 or whatever week we're in. Like, let's just get to the end of the year. The defense is playing really well these last 2 games. So, yeah, you would definitely lose some support in the locker room. And I think the interesting thing with Daboll is, we did a poll on The Athletic when we talked about that last week, and Daboll's approval ratings were remarkably high for a guy who had 3 wins at that time. If you get kind of run Wink out of town, or whatever you want to call it, and you're not able to mend the fences there, I think the fan support, would deteriorate a little bit. Because I think Wink is pretty popular with at least a large chunk of the fan base, and they like him as a defensive coordinator. They wouldn't want to see him go. Yeah, so I think it's going to be interesting to see how they do resolve this, if they are able to, because I don't think it'll be a good look to move on from Wink. But if the thing is just deteriorated to the point where it's unsalvageable, I think that's, how it ends. But, they have a couple weeks here. Maybe they can, find some sort of common ground, work things out. I mean, I think it's definitely mutually beneficial for them to be together from the outside. But again, we're not in those offices. If they just can't stand each other, then that's obviously not a good way to operate. So this will certainly be probably the preeminent topic for the next couple of weeks. And certainly as soon as the season ends, I think all eyes will turn to this and how it plays out.
Yeah, it certainly won't be a good look for the Giants if, as some people have speculated, if they wind up needing 3 new coordinators next year. That certainly wouldn't be a good look for Brian Daboll either. And it may happen because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I fully expect Brian Daboll to control this offense next year. I think he's maybe controlling it more the last couple of weeks than anybody really wants to let on. But Thomas McGahee's always seems to be under fire, and of course now we hear what we hear about Wink. So the Giants could be revamping this coaching staff significantly at season's end.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. Replacing all 3 of your coordinators, that's not a great look. And because obviously Brian Daboll is going to have to go to John Mara and explain his plan for the future, and if it includes wiping out his 3 top lieutenants, that's kind of a tough sell, especially because I know Wink is a guy who is thought highly of. I think McGahee, he's been here. They really like him. I think there's an understanding there. It's probably time to move on. With Kafka, I've felt like it's a little bit of a scapegoat move. They fire Kafka because it's like you said, it's Daboll's offense. He's very hands-on in that. Kafka's not just freelancing and making calls, going rogue. However, to your point, if Daboll is going to take over running the offense, then I'm fine with it. Because listen, if he wants to control his own fate, because year 3 will be a big year for him, that's fine. So if that's the move, but if it's like fire Kafka and basically almost pin the offensive struggles on him and hire Ken Dorsey or promote Jay Tierney and make them the play caller, I wouldn't think that would be as good a look. But if it's just like, listen, Mike, we're not really on the same page, I'm going to run the show, then I'd be more okay with that. But yeah, no, I mean, we'll be doing some research probably if you move on from all 3 coordinators, how many times has that happened and how many times has that worked out? I would think the odds of both of those things are pretty low, and certainly the working out after that fact seems like that would be a bad place to be.
All right, Dan, as we continue here, I want to turn to some work that you guys did at The Athletic before the Giants Week 12 game against the Patriots. I want to talk about the fan survey that you guys did. You guys asked a number of questions, from the future of Daniel Jones to the future of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. And I guess generically, the first question that I want to ask about that is as you look at the results, as you kind of go back and think about the results of that survey, I think you guys asked 8 or 9 questions. Was there anything in there where you said, wow, I really didn't expect that?
I would say the level of support for Daboll and Schoen. Like, I'm not surprised that people want them back. I'm looking at it right now. I think the question was posed as, should Joe Schoen return as GM? Should Brian Daboll return as coach? I would expect the majority to have said yes. It's only been 2 years. Obviously had the really good year 1. Like, I don't think I didn't expect a big chunk of the fan base to be, pushing for change. But Daboll's was 96.6% and Schoen was 95.3%. And I joked on Twitter, you could run a poll like, do you like free ice cream? And I don't know if the votes would be that high in favor of it. So to me, that was pretty surprising. There's just going to be trolls who will vote the opposite on an online poll just to troll. So to see that strong of support for them, that definitely was a little eye-opening. Again, not that I thought that there would be like 50-50. But, 80-20 would have been a good approval rating in my book. So to get 95, 96%, that shows that the fans, I think it was about 2,700 people responded. So it's obviously not every Giants fan, but it's a pretty good sampling. Very much support this regime. And I get it. The year 1 was really good. You just don't want to keep cycling through, especially with a GM. You can't fire a GM after 2 years unless it was just like, he's doing like GM malpractice type thing. So I get it. But yeah, that was probably the biggest one that surprised me. And I think that the support for Daniel Jones was obviously not there. I think it was 76% said he's not a franchise QB. Like, they need to move on. And then Saquon got a little more love than maybe I thought, where 45% said they want to make him a Giant for life, and 34% were in favor of keeping him on another 1-year deal. So, about 75% want him back in some capacity. And then about 80%. And then the other 20% said move on. So it's like a lot of support for Shane and Dable, some strong support for Saquon, and not very much for Daniel Jones. So I wouldn't say anything that was really surprised me, but just the level of support for Shane and Dable was the one thing that jumped out to me.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I think in terms of Shane and Dable, I do think they built some equity last year. And I do think John Mara said it when he hired Joe Judge. They have to get off this 2-year treadmill. And I personally think that at this point, you can't separate Shane from Dable. You can't take the coach away from the GM. When the GM hired this guy, I feel like they're a pair. And I don't know, one bad year, I've questioned and I've written about it, both on Twitter and on my website. I've questioned a lot of the decisions that got made this year. You can question everything from the Daniel Jones contract to how they handled the place kicker situation and just about everything in between. Just about everything they've tried this year has gone sideways. And
right.
yet you're back to square one if you move on again. So I understand people supporting, but yeah, 96%, 95% is I mean, did Dable and Shane get their moms to vote like a few hundred times?
Well, I know Dable's got a bunch of kids, so yeah, maybe they were all on there. But no, yeah, and I totally agree with you. They're a package deal. It's very different. When Dave Gettleman and Shermer came in, Gettleman was able to kind of push Shermer off the plank and save himself. But they weren't really as much of a package deal as Shane and Dable feel like. Obviously, we're in Buffalo together. That was Shane's guy. They are very, very much aligned. They always talk about that, how it feels like it's very much a dual relationship there where every decision is made with both of them very much involved. So, and again, I don't think you can fire a GM after 2 years. So then obviously his handpicked head coach is going to go, be partnered with him. And listen, I think even 3 years would probably be a little quick, but that's where it gets interesting. Because let's say they don't get a quarterback this year. Because if they get a quarterback in the top 10, I think that buys them 2 years. Because you're going to give them the rookie year. And as long as it's not an abject disaster, like say what's happening in Carolina.
Because next year would be a transition year where it's move away from Jones and move to the new guy. So you're right. You've got to give them 2.
Yeah. So say they go 5-12 next year, you wouldn't feel great about that. But if it's kind of like that Pat Shermer year, that's not a good example because he did get fired after Jones looked pretty good his rookie year. But then I think, you give him year 2, and if it's still no progress, then you'd have 3 straight losing seasons. Then obviously I think the decision would be pretty clear. I think where it gets murky is if they aren't able to get a top draft pick quarterback and they kind of have to bring Tyrod back or some similar type player, and they run it back with Jones, assuming he is healthy and is able to start in week 1. And then you have a really bad year next year. Then I'm curious to see if they get a 4th year. But I think obviously they're safe for year 3. And you have to feel some level of confidence that they can turn it around. This has kind of been a Murphy's Law type year. So next year is certainly going to be a big year. But I think whether or not they're able to get a quarterback early in the draft will have a big impact on sort of how next year is viewed going in. Like it could be a hot seat type year, or it could be all right, like you said, we're kind of resetting and we'll see how they develop this quarterback. Because obviously you're hoping it follows sort of that Josh Allen blueprint in Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm one who thinks that if you're going to go ahead and draft a quarterback, I do think it gives them probably the 2 more years, unless next year turns into 1-16. Because I think one of the worst things you can do is draft a quarterback like that really high, and then pull the rug out from under him and put a new regime in place. Because then you're back on that treadmill of he's not the guy we drafted, he's not the guy we want.
Yeah, the Giants, it's funny as we're talking about, they just did that. All we heard about was how Daniel Jones had no continuity, different coaches, different play callers. So you wouldn't want to turn around and do that to another quarterback. Because I think obviously they know they didn't put Daniel Jones in the best situation to succeed. So you want to maybe learn from your mistakes, hopefully. And if they end up in that position, let Dable and Shane grow with the guy that they do handpick, if indeed it comes to that.
Crystal ball, Saquon. we get to next training camp. Saquon a Giant, Saquon somewhere else. What kind of contract does he have if he's a Giant? Do they slap him with the tag again? Just, long-term crystal ball, take your best guess.
I mean, it's funny. I feel like I keep saying this for every topic. It can be fascinating to watch. It's kind of like a thing I keep leaning on, but it will be to see how they approach that, because there's so much water under that bridge. So when they finally, they can't negotiate now, which I'm sure they're happy about that, at least on the Giants side. They're like, listen, hey, our hands are tied. You're on the franchise tag, but as soon as the season ends, and Saquon's agent reached out, I'll be fascinated to find out what that first offer is, because they're not starting from scratch anymore. There's very clear benchmarks that they established last off season. So you're going to come in higher, lower, same. I mean, I think they get something done. It just feels like he wants to be here so badly. And, it's still amazing to me that they couldn't bridge the little gap that existed when we got to that July 17th deadline, whatever it was this past summer. Like, it's amazing to me that they were both so stubborn at the finish line where they couldn't just say, like, it's $1 million or $2 million here.
It's
like,
$1 million, yeah.
And listen, me and you just say $1 million or $2 million here, but in the scope we're talking about, it's not that big of a difference. I think he has really demonstrated his value this year. I mean, out of the gate, you're like, oh man, he's hurt again. Like, that kind of steals his fate. But the way he's played, he's been everything they could have wanted off the field. He's always been that type of guy. I think he's even stepped it up another level this year, because he's still playing hard. He hasn't complained about getting 40 carries in games when they just have no other form of offense. So I think they work something out. Like, I mean, I guess the tag is in their back pocket. I don't think that's in the best interest of either side. Don't go through that dance again. So I think they get a reasonable deal done. And it's, like a 3-year, let's say $39 million, which I think the number a lot of us threw on last year that made sense. And listen, I'm one of the biggest, don't pay a running back. They're easily replaceable. Maybe it's because I did the story on him and I've seen a different side of him. I am starting to come around that him and the Giants might be a unique case where he is so valuable to this team. Can you imagine what this season would look like if they had Matt Breida and Eric Gray at running back? It would be harder to watch than it's already been. I think there is some value to just taking care of him. It's not gonna be a ridiculous deal. They'll be able to get out after 2 years, I'm sure. I think that's how it can play out. And I think it's how it probably should play out.
I would agree. I think that's how I thought it should have played out last year. And I'm like you. I thought, how could you not bridge a gap that was as small as what it reportedly was at that point in time? But Dan, let me close with this last thing for you. As we record this, it's Tuesday. This will be our Wednesday show. We saw this morning that Tiki Barber was named a semifinalist for the Hall of Fame. First time that Tiki has gotten that far, which puts him in the final 25. In your mind, is Tiki Barber Hall of Fame worthy?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he's one of these guys that maybe as time goes on, his career maybe looked at a little better too. He was one of those dual purpose guys before you had so much of that. And you look at his career stats, they stack up with guys who are in the Hall. He had longevity, he had durability, he was super productive. And it's also crazy. He's another one of these running backs who kind of retired on top, I think he was one of the best backs of his era. He's obviously not a slam dunk, as you said, it's the first time he's even gotten to this stage. But I think he deserves it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating because he retired so early. He retired, I think, at 31. And if you use the longevity argument, you can say, and it's funny because I was asked about this on a radio show earlier on Tuesday, and I said no. But I really have to think about that. I really have to go back and look at the numbers, because the only argument against it that I can make is the longevity argument, and maybe that's not enough. But anyway, Dan, I appreciate the time. Why don't you let folks know, if they don't know, where they can find your work on the platform formerly known as Twitter, and what you guys might have coming up during the bye week at The Athletic.
So Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, is Duggan21. And then, as you referenced, obviously you can find all our stuff, myself and Charlotte Carroll, on The Athletic. To be honest, I don't have a lot planned. I'm hoping nothing crazy happens. There's not any news. I was kind of bracing. Let's not have any wink announcements or anything to disrupt my bye week. I am, it's been a late bye week. It's been kind of a long slog to get to this point. So I am trying to relax as much as possible. And then obviously we'll kick it into high gear next week. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully a quiet week. Let's hope that the Giants oblige.
You have small kids, Dan. You can't relax and have quiet weeks. That's not allowed.
So that's why for 9 to 5 is when I need to get that time. Because yeah, as soon as they wake up and they're off to daycare and school, and as soon as they come home, like you said, there's no such thing as quiet. So I'm gonna try and have these afternoons and mornings to myself as best I can without the Giants intruding on it. Hopefully.
All right. Well, we appreciate you letting us intrude on one of your afternoons. So thank you for that. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.